Nelson. I'm the director and curator here at the Pence Gallery. And today I'm in an exhibit called Found. And Found includes artwork by 15 local and regional artists who are all living and working in Northern California. And I've included work that exclusively focuses on found objects. And so you'll see a lot of people who make found object art use objects in different ways. Either sometimes it's for personal associations, sometimes larger cultural references, and sometimes it's more environmental concerns. Regardless of the reason why they use found objects, all of these assemblages are really interesting, and I hope you come see the work in person.
I wanted to start with a piece by Nathan Cordero. Found object art can be things that are found from the ground, and Nathan is a person who really loved finding things with a metal detector, walking around town. He lived in Sacramento, and he was really fascinated by things that had history, and kind of taking those things, changing them, making your own history. And if you look closely at his work, it has a lot of wonderful little bits of wood that are pasted together, lots of little images that he's included, images of women, parts of his drawings, parts from other collages, and there's just simply a lot of rhythm and pattern that's going on here. Nathan was fascinated by what's underneath, not just what's underneath the ground, but he would oftentimes with wood paint the surface white and carve into it and put text in it. So we see that happening a little bit with some of his pieces. We have a little leaf here that's carved out. We have hearts and lots of different bits of text that is all put together, and it's even with found wood that he's made a frame of. Moving on to a different piece by Jim Aden. Jim unfortunately passed away last year, and we wanted to include him, so there's two pieces by him in the show. And this is a great piece to talk about found object art because it references a really famous piece by Merritt Oppenheim, who in 1936 made this piece called Object. And Object was a fur-lined teacup, just a teacup that she bought in a department store and some fur she had kind of laying around. She also covered the spoon. And this piece you can see is an antique bedpan, which is covered with fur, and it's called Relax. And so one thing that's great about found object art is the way juxtaposed objects can mean something completely different. It's slightly surreal. Again, it's a bedpan, it's meant to be sat on, and then you have the fur in the middle. So it's that combination also of textures and objects, man-made versus wild, that you see in Merritt Oppenheim's Object. So I think it's a really fun piece that relates back to history. Carrie Zeiser's piece is called 7th through 9th, and it's really a title that references the group of kids that she works with at a middle school, 7th through 9th grade. And this is pants that she had from her own home, from her kids, from her family, and they're sewn together in this great kind of orb. It's also placed on a little stool that she made herself. All of these materials are things that kind of reference her family, not just the pants, but even the stool she had made with the help, I believe, of her uncle. She's very inspired by family heritage. She's done a lot of work on her own family, collecting objects from her family, and just the idea that it's so twisted and kind of knotted. I love that aspect of this piece and how it really relates to, she said, kind of struggling with those kids and all sorts of different issues that year. Sherry Hacker is an artist who made a series of boxes. She calls them boxes on wheels. They're made of found wood, as well as different toys and objects that she's just found from her studio, from life, collected from different places. This one has older little plastic toys of zoo animals, and on each side there is a little animal that's been painted, and she creates this little world in her boxes. On the top of it is a tree, and the animals are kind of doing almost like a little merry-go-round. There's a pattern also on the top, which looks more like some sort of target. So it's really interesting how she blends craft materials like wood, acrylic paint, and just kind of basic materials. This is astroturf and the little toys, and creates something that are sort of bigger than the sum of their parts. This is Eno Gold's piece. It's called Anxious, and Eno is a great craftsman in that he can take almost any older machine and convert it into an art object. And this piece you can see is a face. It kind of reminds me of Homer Simpson a little bit, and it's made out of this old machinery All of these are dials from different kinds of things, like this is from a scale, and this is for balancing a train, he said. And you can see that when I crank it, we're actually turning a motor here, which is generating electricity. So you can see that down below. His nose moves, his eyes move. So it's a really neat reconfiguration of old machinery into making something new. Even the top part of the head was made from a machine that you would use to clean an Airstream trailer. So he completely transforms these found objects into something really interesting. This is Iana Frisby's piece. It's called Nomad. She made it during 2020 when she couldn't travel, and the whole piece is kind of mobile. It's on these little casters. She also references travel with her St. Christopher medal, which is inside one of these little ceramic shapes. Iana is primarily a ceramic artist, but she does use a lot of mixed media in her work. And you can see things like paint, found objects such as jewelry, different sort of metal knickknacks, sparkly things that she finds at vintage and antique stores. She's also really interested in caves. She had this really transformative experience where she went into a cave and saw these stalactites and stalagmites, and just the rock formations really influenced the form of her ceramics. So some of her pieces really look like they might be from a cave. And I think it's really interesting, being that ceramics comes from the ground. She's really attracted to things that really reference the earth. There's assorted minerals here, and then she also included a magnifying glass on the other side where you can look through and see this little image, which is in this glass tube, of a cave ceiling. So it's wonderful details, lots of sparkles. She's kind of creating her own little world here. One thing that she said she was really influenced by were the German kind of ideas of Wunderkammer, which is like a cabinet of curiosities where they collected things from nature and assembled them together to show the public. Tammy Rossmeier's work is really interesting to me because she does primarily figures, and a lot of times she chooses things pulled from nature. But in this case, she's chosen the workings of a piano. So we have the piano keys, we have actually the inner kind of workings of the piano itself. And she's made it into a figure that's dancing with this sort of ballet skirt made out of sheet music. It's very lyrical, there's a lot of movement in it, and all of her figures she names and kind of gives personalities. So I find them really very charming. Stephen Giannetti's piece is called RGB. It is composed out of many, many poker chips. And he started using poker chips as a pattern for his paintings. And more recently, he started making those chips into sculptures. So originally he was kind of spray painting over them with this acrylic aerosol paint and creating grids of different circles. Then he decided, these are interesting in and of themselves. So the chips themselves are stacked and glued together, and they make this wonderful pattern on the sides. All of his sculptures are different, either organic shapes or they're geometric shapes. So this one references an early color system that TVs used for RGB means red, green, and blue. And those coincidentally happen to be the same colors as the chips he chose. This is a piece by Michael Stevens, and the piece is called Who's on First? He's carved into the back this question mark, and the glove itself becomes a face. And the whole piece is dedicated to his brother-in-law, Jim Aiden. And Jim is also an artist who has a piece in the show. Jim just recently passed away. So, and I love it that Michael titled the piece Who's on First, which references this classic radio play. And the radio play by Abbott and Costello is something they do back and forth where they go, who's on first? It's all about baseball. And they did it over 15,000 times. And it's a kind of a classic humor routine. So I feel like it's kind of an homage to Jim and his friendship with Jim. So it's really nice to have the piece in the show. This is a piece by Randy Brennan. Randy oftentimes references the 50s as a time period. And in this piece, it's called Toy Box. He includes toys that were from his family. This is a little piece, actually, this little deep sea diver with a mermaid that was from his grandfather. So it's all of these objects that relate to family heritage. They also relate to how kids played. And the toy box itself is made out of cement and metal, so it's this very heavy piece, but it has very fun, playful things on it, like there's a motorcycle rider, there's the word peace, There's different sort of patterns on it. So it's a really dynamic piece, and all the kind of vehicles are coming out at you. So it really reminds me just of how active kids play, and kind of a nostalgic piece for a different time period. Suzanne Eden is the artist of this piece, and it's called Wake Up Little Susie. I think the title might have something to do with the song, but it also has to do with a little 45 record that's on the back of the piece. Wake Up Little Susie, of course, is a song that could reference, of course, Suzanne as well. It has some wonderful collage bits on it. There's faces, there's all the sort of braids that are tangled up with different objects. Some of them are things like pets, numbers, houses. A lot of this is hand-drawn in between the collage. And then she has a tremendous amount of text that she's handwritten here, which is kind of hard to read. So a tremendous amount of little detail with her drawings. And then of course it's on a little toy piano. So the whole thing looks very reminiscent of something you might find from the 50s. And the collage itself almost looks very Dadaist, the way she juxtaposes the commercial images, maybe from a newspaper or a magazine, with bits of her own drawing and writing. This is the collage piece by Jill Allen Spafford. And one thing I thought about this piece was it's not really an assemblage because it's primarily flat, but she did include this recipe which sticks out. So I thought, well, collage and assemblage are related, so let's include it. And I really like Jill's work, primarily because she deals with found objects that are from her family. And her dad recently passed away, and she inherited this huge trove of things like letters and recipes and photographs, and she had to go through them. And with all of that information, she's made this great piece, which is about recipes. And I think that's one way, especially that women communicated, was sharing recipes and ideas about food. You know, that was kind of their role, was to be, you know, the primary homemaker was, we made food. So here we have this woman here with this kind of bottle of orange soda, and then here's the recipe, and she includes, this is all kind of real stuff from her family, a little envelope as well as the recipe itself for white sauce, which to me is not something I ever want to make, but it's there. So it's a really fun piece, again, slightly nostalgic about a different time period that came before us that kind of relates to different kinds of women's roles, certainly. Julia Cousins' piece, Summer Wind, is an assemblage made of found materials from her studio and things she just finds about town. We have things like felt, there's thread here, yarn, and then there's found crochet. There looks like there's bits of also canvas, which she stitched. There's this idea of showing the artist's hand and that it doesn't have to be sewn perfectly or made perfectly. There's this idea of really that you can show the craft of the piece. And these are materials that typically you would find, you know, in more of a craft store, not necessarily a fine artwork. It's on a piece of reclaimed wood, and it sticks out a lot. It looks very sculptural. And it's really interesting the way she almost creates this little sense of a landscape with it. At least I read into it, a landscape where your eye kind of goes back, and it's almost like there's a pond here. So again, using found objects to push them, she layers them in different ways to make something that is larger than themselves and to really reuse things that normally you would throw away. Ron Keats is the artist for this piece, and it's called Making a Case for Our Mutt. And it references a very, very famous assemblage, probably the first assemblage, which is by Marcel Duchamp, which he signed with the pseudonym R. Mutt. Here, Ron has kind of made a play on that. He's actually made a dog out of this violin case. And so making a case, this is the case. It's very seamless. You can see the dog's legs, he has a tail, and he also makes this wonderful little wooden box that it sits on. It really seems very animated. And then just the whole idea that you can take these found objects and transform them completely into something which is very surreal. Ron is very good at that. He loves wordplay, and there's a ton of humor in his work. This is a piece by Terry Peterson. It's called Magnify, and it includes a lot of found objects in which the material is really important to Terry. He comes from an area up in Fort Bragg where timber and lumber and things like that were one of the major industries. So you see little bits of wood here, you see the axe for chopping wood. You also see things that kind of reference the pandemic. The toilet paper, this is actually toilet paper. that's been dipped and cut on a bandsaw, so you see that coming down. And then these are castings which are of a fish that he found once. So even natural objects can be found objects. The fish, is long gone in some ways, but yet these castings remain of it. And then the piece we'll show you actually does have a mechanical side, so it makes noise, it goes in and out, and it's called magnify, which you get closer and further away from this fish that's holding this blue ball. And on the ball is written the word famous over and over and over